Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. Trust me, this one is worth watching and it actually is going to matter. So, people are kinda pissed, and I can see why, but a lot has been lost in how this story has been covered. So, timed as if it was a direct response to the Xbox Series X show-off, Sony have revealed details about what powers their vision of the future. And now that we actually know what next-gen overall looks like from both main parties from a technical perspective, there's a lot to talk about. And actually, it's wild. Narrow crevices to slowly shimmy through, and suspiciously long elevator rides, well, they could forever be dead, and that's just the start, and the impact in PC is going to be massive. Now, yes, we haven't seen any games yet, but there are vital ways in which they will be transformed, vital ways in which they are no longer being held back, such as 5400 RPM. So, today we're going to go through the surrounding drama, because wow, Sony really missed the mark in their marketing. Then, we're going to discuss the console, what it actually means for the games in the consoles, and for PC gamers, and then we're going to talk about the promises that Sony may be breaking and what is missing. Now, if you're new here, then hello, we're a game dev studio. There's more about what we're doing along those lines down below, and we do 6 game industry news and analysis videos per week, so sub for more of that good stuff. Hit that like button and those comments to help us out with the algorithm. Plus, I'd really love to know what you think about all the stuff we're going to talk about in today's video. So, with that, let's get cracking. Okay, so basically what Sony did here is they filmed a presentation that was planned for GDC, and then they released it to the public. Now, Mark Cerny, their lead system architect, broke down their tech and the decision-making for developers. Now, this sounds entirely reasonable, but in many ways it was actually an awful idea in how they did it, as evidenced by the dislike ratio and on the presentation itself, and just the general community reaction. How come? I mean, Cerny delivered a great presentation, lots of info. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fascinating. Now, think about the target audience. GDC attendees. That's experienced game developers. Who actually watched it? Well, almost 8 million people who are excited about the PS5. Fans of the PS5 who, well, you know, they want to know how cool it is. They want to see it, right? They want to see what fantastic first-party experiences they're going to get for their new console. So Sony had a legion of extremely thirsty fans dying for some crisp, clean water, and what they actually did was just bring out a bunch of cups of coffee. Sure, it was information, but it's not what the people expected or wanted. It also doesn't help that the numbers on the CPU and GPU front do look a decent bit lower than what Xbox showed earlier this week. Now, sadly here, no matter how much Mark Cerny explained the fundamental differences in approach and why these numbers are actually lower, people are just going to be really reductionist, look at a spec sheet, not going to think, use it to back up whatever bias they already have and start screaming. This is overall a fundamental failing on Sony's end. They didn't do a great job of revealing this, and the Series X, I think, did a much better job of just being on message for the people actually reading their announcement. They didn't show new games, yes, but I think they showed, you know, older games running better, and importantly, what the console actually looks like. So really, Sony's marketing team needs to get it together here, because it does feel like the public opinion is leaning heavily to one side, and I think for an understandable enough reason. Okay, with that said, let's actually go into the console itself. So the CPU is 8 Zen 2 cores clocked at 3.5 GHz. So like we said in our Xbox video, it's about the same as a Ryzen 3700X, just that it doesn't have the higher boost clocks that a PC can reach. Then the RDNA 2 GPU has 36 compute units at 2.2 GHz, compared to the Series X's 52 at 1.8 GHz. Now that does leave it a bit slower than the Series X in some situations, but the higher per core clocks would make it better in others. So yes, on paper the Series X is faster, but it's hard to compare where it actually matters, which is the games themselves. Now, the major difference overall here is the PS5 has variable frequencies based on its workload, and this is very different to the Series X's idea of just consistent performance, but Sony's approach, I suppose, technically could be allowing for more consistent power consumption and thus more consistent thermals, but again, we need to see what it looks like physically before we really understand the thermal design. But theoretically, yes, it could be quieter and cooler than the PS4, which I mean it really would have to be. Now, like the Series X, the RDNA 2 chip also supports some hardware ray tracing and a bunch of other juicy dev stuff. Now, the thing here that actually matters for you as a consumer of games is that development follows the install base, right? So ray tracing hardware in just about every gaming home, that's going to turn actually using ray tracing into a priority for devs. Now, as for the experience we'll have on this hardware, Look, there's more than enough power here to make this feel like a generational leap for all but the high-end PC gamers, right? In fact, I mean, the console world finally catching up is going to let tons of devs focus on really just hitting targets that only a few PC games have been able to really target visually, so that is good news. Now, as much as CPU and GPU are big, the most transformative thing is the SSD here, and on that front, I mean, wow, this is stunning if you know the tech here. So the spec sheet, like, it's got 9 gigabytes per second compressed, and if that's accurate, that is madness. I mean, combined with all of the low-level custom hardware that Sony spoke about in the presentation, this means that it would fill its 16 gigs of RAM in less than 2 seconds. That's insane. Games should be loading before you even put the controller down here. I mean, the game data will be in the RAM when the developers need it, far faster than it is right now, and this will matter. Sony claims that games could be deloading what is behind the player and then reloading it when the player turns around, so there's that. Now, the 8 gig to 16 gig jump in RAM is also a good thing, and I think it's going to feel larger than it is because of the SSD changes, and it could mean that sort of, modern level designs will be a bit more free from some certain technical considerations, such as the elevator load times. Like, say, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, the way you gotta shimmy around between things when you're moving between zones. I mean, if you've got these transfer speeds into RAM for loading, you're not going to have to do those things as much. And that really could start to impact our games. Now, in terms of how this insane speed is actually enabled, well, it's basically just a ton of custom hardware that we're going to get back into, and it is important because it could usher in a fundamental shift in the console versus PC debate. Now, this insane SSD is only 825 gigs though. That size is because of how they've custom built it for efficiency, but look, we all know that 825 gigs is not that much. But that said, like what the Series X is promising, Sony also promises that game sizes will be going down because of the removal of duplication. Now, the TLDR here, to explain what that actually means, is that the large sequential file blocks and tons of duplication found in a lot of contemporary games, they are needed to avoid large hard drive seek times. Now, as a side effect, that means that game and patch installs, they could basically be a thing of the past in a way. All they need to do is get the data into storage instead of, building and rebuilding file blocks for drive seek time efficiency, which they've got to do currently. So that should mean that once the game's downloaded, that should basically be it. There shouldn't be all those complicated install things that you have to do now. That said, it doesn't seem like this is hyper-specific to the PS5. They maybe have a better implementation, but the Series X is doing similar things, so I imagine that these will be fundamentally applicable across both consoles, but just that there are going to be different implementations for both consoles. But fundamentally, this is quite massive. Now, let's get back to the 825 gigs size. They also revealed how they're handling expansion, and this is great. Rather than going proprietary like the Xbox are, they're just allowing for any third-party NVMe drives. Now, they say they're only going to be officially supporting ones where they can confirm that the drives will meet their speed requirements, but they're going to be suggesting PCIe 4 SSDs that are just on the open market, and that means it's probably going to be a hell of a lot cheaper than it is over in the Xbox side. They're also, as well, going to allow for USB external drives for running like your backwards compatible games or just storing more PS5 games. So overall, pretty darn good stuff there. Now, the last bit of important tech that Mark talked about was the Tempest audio engine. This is going to be very difficult to discern, I would say, until it's actually out in the wild, but effectively, they've just spent a whole bunch of time and effort on 3D audio, rather than a simple approximation of 3D space for the audio, which is effective enough. What they're actually doing is, they're basically going a bit more next level on it. So true presence in audio that is designed for how you specifically hear things. That's what they're going for. Basically, it's a bit like the binaural audio that you will have heard from maybe ASMR videos, but taken to the next level, trying to simulate the effects of the user's ear canal on the audio. We'll have to actually see how far they get with their user profiles and the testing, but as a next-gen experience, that certainly could be fantastic. Mark's example of giving raindrop specific locations for audio to come from, that does sound like it could create some truly just incredible immersive experiences, especially if you're using good headphones. So right now, I think users won't be that excited about this, but I'd say audio engineers certainly will be pleased to hear they've now got an array of dedicated hardware for audio processing. So to bring this all back, All in all, this could truly be transformative for games for a few reasons. First off, the design changes that are enabled. The CPU and the GPU are such a leap for both consoles that we will be seeing much prettier games running at far more reasonable frame rates. That much is pretty obvious here, and it doesn't mean too much for the PC market because we'll always just be getting the top-end cards. However, finally abandoning spinning storage is a true game changer. The obvious file size, installation time, and load time improvements are there, but there's a hidden element here. Games have been designed to cleverly hide their flaws for years. Levels and worlds are designed in ways that mean that, they can load effectively to mask how slow like a 5400 RPM hard drive actually is, and it's tremendously slow. Now, this extends way past elevators, ladders, and narrow corridors that your character shimmies through to mask a loading time. Basically, games have got to be designed with minimum specs in mind, and for multi-platforms, that's a 5400 RPM hard drive and a 2013 AMD CPU. Without those limitations, developers can basically rewrite the playbook without having to worry about delays whenever assets are actually being loaded in on these consoles. Fast travel taking no more than a few seconds, that's been possible on PC for years, but with the limiter of old drives being removed, developers can actually rely on their users getting those speeds. It's hard to know what they'll do here, but it's new tools being given to developers that I imagine will lead to a fair few surprises and innovations. Then there's also something interesting here about the sheer amount of custom hardware that has been revealed for the PS5. Basically, right now the consoles are operating, at least when these launch, on a similar power level to the sort of current PCs of the day. That means the consoles can start to be fully taking advantage of them, being solely built for video games. So the custom compression chip, the custom cache clearing, systems, that are designed for extremely low latency between the SSD and the RAM, and, even say that custom audio chip. They're all unique things for these consoles. The ability to fill 16 gigs of memory in less than 2 seconds, that is not going to be possible on PC for a while. That's just how it is right now. I mean, sure, you can maybe do that with an add-in card or a very, very high-end setup, but not for your average or even average high-end PC that's made for gaming. Now, on both the consoles, their decompression chips, they're doing the work of multiple full Zen 2 cores. That's work that a PC will need to do without that specific help. Designing from the ground up just allows to, skip a ton of overhead. And especially when we're talking about Windows, which is really not that efficient. Basically, the PC route of brute forcing stuff with higher specs, that's great, but it might need to, spend a few years to get ahead of some of these meticulously designed consoles. Now, obviously, we'll have to actually see what happens around launch here, but part of that PC supremacy that we all enjoy, at least on the PC gaming side, like myself, I am a PC gamer, a part of what we can brag about, that might actually have to be on hold for a few years here. Of course, only a part, because I also use my gaming PC for my job and many, many, many other things, like my Plex server, so obviously you can't do all that on a console, but you get my point. Purely for gaming, these consoles are super competitive, and having specifically designed hardware, just those custom chips, that's something that your PC is not going to have, and that is a unique advantage that both the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 will bring to the market. Now, all that juicy stuff said, the other important thing is the promise of backwards compatibility for these consoles. And that's actually a little bit of a mess here, right? So the way that Cerny explained it in his talk sounded like he was talking purely about the PS5's high and variable clock speeds, and that they can only promise the enhanced support on tested games. Now, that's what Mark implied in his talk. However, he wasn't really crystal clear about it, and then later, the PlayStation blog tried to make some sort of attempt at clarifying this, and right now it's just hard to know what's exactly right. So their version says that almost all of the top 100 played games on the PS4 will be playable on launch. Now, that's pretty darn explicit. It seems like it's not full backwards compatibility for everything, at least not yet. Now, that is pretty disappointing compared to the total backwards compatibility and the smart delivery system of Xbox, what they've promised here. But right now, it also is just confusion. We'll have to wait and see. I guess it's also a huge asterisk to things that Sony said throughout last year as the excitement for the PS5 started to ramp up. So it's a bit weird. Hopefully, we get a lot more clarity in this stuff going forward. Especially with the PS4's final batch of games, hitting shelves in the coming months. But that said, I imagine they'll all work in the PS5 just fine. I mean, surely they won't break their old promises there. That would be a tremendously bad look, a really bad way for them to start off the console gen. Now, the real question, at the end of the day, right, here is, where are the games? What are the games? What's going on, right? That's what everyone wants to know, and it's what nobody is showing off. Are the console makers afraid, right? Who knows? They're making massive promises, but in terms of games, they're showing very little here. Technical specs will not assuage the average person. Devs and pundits will maybe be interested in that. I certainly am, but that's not the most important factor. The most important thing is the players. Negative sentiment is starting to snowball here for Sony, and Microsoft, they did a pretty good job of, of their Series X specs announcement. At least it seemed like a more clear announcement to players. But then even with that, there's one thing that neither have done, and that is price, right? Announcing the price for these incredible machines, that's going to be like ripping a bandage off. So they're going to need real smooth, good relations with people first. And that's going to be tricky because right now we don't know how much these are, and certainly these are really good specs. I've got to wonder if they will be a little bit more expensive than the PS4 and the Xbox One were at launch. But anyway, that is it for today's video. A bit of a run over of the overall next gen, specifically, of course, the PlayStation 5. If you're interested in the Xbox Series X, though, we did do a video on that. Seemingly barely anyone watched it, but we did do the video. So if you want to check that out, you can check that out next. And yeah, that's it for me. Let me know what you think about this down below, and I'll see you next time.